Hello. Hello. Thank you. Thank you for the moving performance from the Canopy Dancers. So hello, good evening, or good afternoon, yate. She serishkishin nishlin do torishini bashichin. Torishini dasha che da tabaha dasha nale. She Jennifer Jones yinishe. Akotego dene zana nishlin. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Jones. I identify as a member of the Dene, or Navajo Nation, and I just shared my traditional introduction with you in Navajo. I am a current PhD student in the Environment and Resources program here at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, where I focus on tribal energy justice research. My proposed research project is on tribally owned utility development in the state of Wisconsin to understand the 11 or 12 tribal nations' vision and goals to increase self-determination of clean, reliable electricity services. So related to the earlier land acknowledgement, if you were here, I wanted to make note that I identify with the Dene tribal nation and consider my position here as a visiting scholar to the ancestral homelands of the Ho-Chunk Nation. So as a visiting scholar, I intend for my work to return to the local tribal communities and their peoples to support their vision of clean advancements in serving and protecting Mother Earth, Father Sky, and the next 7 generations to come. And with that, I am really excited to introduce our next keynote speaker for today, Dr. Tony Reames. Dr. Reames is an energy and environmental justice scholar and government policy advisor. He is the Tishman Professor of Environmental Justice and the Associate Professor of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan, School for Environment and Sustainability. He is also the director of the university's Sustainability Clinic in Detroit. Reames's research investigates fair and equitable access to affordable, reliable, clean energy and explores the production and persistence of energy disparities across race, class, and place. He founded the Urban Energy Justice Lab and Energy Equity Project. Reames was a presidential appointee in the Biden-Harris administration, serving at the U.S. Department of Energy as the Deputy Director for Energy Justice. He established the first ever Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis and led the development and implementation of the President's Justice 40 initiative. Reames was also Principal Deputy Director for the state and community energy programs, managing and deploying $16 billion in clean energy program funding to state, local, tribal governance, and community-based organizations. Tony Reames holds a Doctor of Philosophy and Public Administration from the University of Kansas, a Master's of Engineering Management from Kansas State University, and a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University. He's a licensed professional engineer and an Army veteran. It is especially an honor to be introducing Tony today, as he was my master's degree advisor at the start of my time at the University of Michigan. Even before starting at SEAS, Tony was the reason I applied and selected my offer. To be working with not only a veteran and an energy justice leading scholar, but also someone who understood the complexities of being a tribal student in Western academic spaces. So that was a critical portion of why I decided to become a Michigan Wolverine. And although my time at SEAS had to continue after Tony's departure, I knew he would get the necessary stepping stones established for many of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities to have clean, reliable, and affordable energy in our nation. So I'm sure you will enjoy our talk today. And with that, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Tony Reames.
All right, let me make sure I turn my mic on. All right, can you all hear me? All right, good. So I think I have officially arrived. That is the first time this is the first time I've ever followed an interpretive dance and given a speech. So super excited about that. Well, good afternoon, Wisconsin. Happy Earth Fest. Special thanks to Jennifer for that introduction. I didn't realize until today that she and I had never met in person because she came to school during the pandemic. So we were remote during that time, and so it's really good to lay eyes on you physically. I want to thank Dean Robbins and the Nelson Institute for the invitation to be with you all today. Special thanks to Emily and Alessandra for all the support on my trip getting here from across the Great Lakes. And to all of you, beautiful people, for choosing to join this event on a Friday afternoon. Beautiful sun. It's a little colder than I expected it to be. So I know this is coming my way to Michigan this weekend. But again, I bring you greetings from across the pond, a place that is credited with being the predecessor to Earth Day. As many of you know, the first Earth Day took place on April 22nd, 1970, on the heels of a teach-in on the environment that was hosted at the University of Michigan by a group called Environmental Action for Survival, or ENACT, where a handful of students, staff, and professors came together to talk about the urgency of our environmental issues. Michigan is also the home to the first ever Environmental Justice Research Conference, the Michigan Conference on Race and the Incidence of Environmental Hazards, bringing together researchers from across the country. At that event, it became the springboard for making sure that environmental justice was seen as a legitimate academic endeavor and also sparked very high-level conversations in the federal government to make environmental justice real. And so it's on that history that I am honored to be the Tishman Professor of Environmental Justice in the School for Environment and Sustainability, and to also bring focus on another justice issue that I'll talk about today that's at the intersection of our environmental and climate crises, energy justice. So today I want to spend a little time with you, and I got my time checker in the back. Thank you, Alessandra, because getting back into this, kind of academic speaking space, academics, we can talk for a really long time. I grew up as a missionary Baptist in the South. I'm not a preacher, but I definitely can act like one on certain days. But I want to talk about this moment that we're in, right? The urgency of the moment and how we have to move with intention. And so I want to talk about the arc of environmental justice and energy justice to frame that conversation. So I use a couple quotes here that you may be familiar with to really frame what I hope to talk to you about today. So the first quote comes from Reverend Martin Luther King about the arc of the moral universe being long but bending toward justice. And so according to the writer Michael Smith, Martin Luther King's quote is a paraphrasing of a sermon delivered in 1853 by abolitionist minister Theodore Parker. In the sermon, Parker said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." Now, for Parker, there is no guarantee of the moral universe doing as he wishes. It's only through his own conscience and thereby his own actions that justice will be achieved. And so President Obama is known for using this quote in a lot of his speeches. But then he went on to further clarify his interpretation of that and kind of going back to the original speech. And you can see in the second quote, the arc of the moral universe may bend toward justice, but it doesn't bend on its own. And so again, that is how I want you to think about my conversation with you this afternoon, that in order to bend the moral universe toward justice, it takes urgency, an earnest and persistent quality or insistence. And it takes intention, having the concentrated will on something or some end or some purpose. So we're all on the same page, providing a definition of environmental justice from the Department of Energy, as well as very similar to that of the EPA. This is an evolved definition. I talked about the conference in 1990 at University of Michigan, where there was really focus on environmental racism. The language has shifted some, and this is the current definition of environmental justice: the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of our environmental laws, regulations, and policy. Now, this slide here, I'm using it to really illustrate the arc of environmental justice over the last 4 decades, starting with Warren County, North Carolina. Some of you may know the story of Warren County. Majority African-American community fighting a landfill that would bring PCBs to their community, when other sites that were also suitable in the county, majority white census tracts or communities, were not considered. People literally laid their bodies in front of dump trucks to try to stop this landfill. Now, the landfill was still built, but it sparked a movement that, again, has endured with urgency and intention over the last 40 years or so. So in 1994, based on the research that was happening, the movement that was launched in North Carolina, President Clinton signed the first ever executive order on environmental justice to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. Today, we have the first ever African-American male administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, a native of North Carolina. And so 40 years after that first protest in 1982, Administrator Reagan went back to Warren County, North Carolina, to launch the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, a new office bringing together environmental justice policy advisors and civil rights lawyers to actually address environmental injustices. And then in April 2023, President Biden recommitted the federal government to environmental justice with Executive Order 14096, revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. And so while the fight has continued in environmental justice communities, there are points of light throughout that 40-year history of urgency and intention to environmental justice. Now, some people may say, why on earth do we need a new term like energy justice when there also is climate justice, and now folks are working on water justice or bringing it all together under utility justice? That's just how we think, right? But it allows us to focus. And I see energy justice playing a really unique role in both our environmental justice efforts and our climate justice efforts. And so you can see here from the Institute of Energy Justice, a definition that we have somewhat adopted at the Department of Energy. Energy justice is really referring to the goal of achieving equity in both social and economic participation in the energy system, but also addressing the harm that our energy system has caused. And so energy justice allows us to focus on means of tackling injustice with both environmental and climate knock-ons. How many people know what knock-ons are? I didn't know either. So this is a paper from a colleague of mine, a UK scholar, Kirsten Jenkins. I think it's a rugby term, but it is a British term that means resulting inevitably but indirectly from another event or circumstance. So basically, energy justice allows us to bring together the principles of environmental justice, but also the challenges that we have when it comes to climate justice. And so there are several interrelated principles that we use to understand both environmental justice, energy justice, and climate justice, and I wanted to just show those to you. Procedural injustices that exist. We're talking about inadequate access to information or the lack of participation in decision-making. Distributional injustices. How are certain communities bearing the burden versus the benefits? Restorative justice, a goal of making things right. The injustice is that there are not a lot of legal avenues for addressing issues that communities face. And then recognition justice, right? Understanding different vulnerabilities of different communities. So I often say that we are living in the United States of energy and security. So this is what got me into this work. This is what has led me to continue to do this work. And I like to use headlines because this is how we know what is really happening throughout our country and throughout our world. And so in the first one-third here, it's really about affordability. During the pandemic, millions of households were at risk of losing energy because people had either lost jobs or people were at home using more energy, and so it was becoming more expensive. Families were being cut off by their utilities, and there were reports coming out like powerless in the pandemic, right? Millions of people at energy risk. And this is deadly. It wasn't just because we were dealing with a global pandemic, but every day millions of households face the challenges, the health challenges, the life or death challenges of not having energy. A mother and son found frozen to death on the west side of Detroit. A New Jersey grandmother dying because she was on energy or oxygen that needed energy. Paid her bill, it didn't get to the shut-off team in time, and so her energy was shut off and she died. We saw the storm in Texas, the largest energy producing state in this country, failing miserably to provide electricity. And then we have cyber attacks. We have physical attacks on our energy infrastructure. And so we are suffering a crisis that needs solutions. My focus is usually on residential energy insecurity, and so really focusing on this issue of households not being able to meet their basic energy needs. And so our first national understanding of this came in 2015. The Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration did a national survey that they've done since the 70s, but this was the first time they asked all participants about energy insecurity. And what we found was that 1 in 3 US households face some type of energy insecurity. And so there are 3 conditions that we're interested in. The inability to pay your energy bill, reducing or foregoing basic necessities, sometimes we call that heat or eat, or keeping your home too hot or too cold, keeping it at unhealthy temperatures. And you can see a slight dip, the kind of second bar on each third, a dip during the beginning of the pandemic. That was because we put a lot of moratorium in place to stop people from getting shut off. And so we know that our solutions work. Once those went away, you can see those numbers increasing across the country. But it's not equal all over the country. So one metric to understand energy insecurity is energy burden, or the proportion of your income that you spend on energy costs. And you can see how the purple number is kind of the median energy burden in these different regions. So let's look in our region here with Michigan and Wisconsin. The median energy burden for households is about 3.6% of your income. But if you're low income, you're spending 3 times that almost of your income on energy costs. Energy burden is a major problem. And it also has public health implications. A study with me and some colleagues looking at energy burden across the country, we found that each % increase of energy burden has major impacts on public health. So each % increase causes 240 more premature deaths. Each % increase causes or is related to 7% more residents saying their health is fair or poor. And it also is related to a 5% or 5-year decrease in average life expectancy. And so energy burden, energy insecurity is not only an economic issue, it's a public health issue. So some people may say, why don't low-income people, poor people, disadvantaged people just participate in energy efficiency, right? So we wanted to figure that out. Is that even available for people? So we did a very simple study. Are LED light bulbs accessible and affordable in poor communities? So we looked in the Detroit area. We divided the Detroit area into 4 income groups. Areas that were less than 10% poverty, 10 to 20% poverty, 20 to 40% poverty, and greater than 40% poverty. So I'll walk through this really quickly. So the teal color, those are incandescent bulbs, the least energy efficient bulbs. Orange are LED bulbs, the most efficient. So in wealthy neighborhoods at the top, most of the stores had incandescent bulbs and most of the stores had LED bulbs. Now, if we go down to the bottom, This is the poorest neighborhoods in the Detroit area. 95% had incandescent bulbs, so the least energy efficient bulbs. Only about half, a little over half, had LED bulbs. So you could walk into a store, potentially in a poor neighborhood, and not see any LED bulbs. And so when it came to cost, we were really interested in, like, what is the cost difference? So again, teal is energy inefficient, orange is efficient. In a wealthy neighborhood, it was about $3 to transition from an energy inefficient bulb to an LED bulb. But look at the poor neighborhoods. So if a bulb was even available in a store, it was twice the cost. Twice the cost. So we're talking about 40% of the people in poverty. If you walk into a store and see a $1.62 bulb versus an $8 bulb, which one are you gonna get? And so this, highlighted, that we need policy solutions to make sure that even something as simple as an LED bulb to be more efficient is available in all neighborhoods. Now, the issue is, and I talked to some students about this morning, utility companies partner with big box stores to offer in-store rebates. There are no big box stores, primarily in poor neighborhoods, so there are no rebates, and so LED bulbs are the actual wholesale price. Another issue is, as the transition is happening, it's not happening equitably on things like adopting solar. So we can look at racial disparities in the adoption of solar. The dark blue bar is the percentage of census tracts that are majority this race that have solar, and census tracts that don't have solar in the lighter blue. So if you look at majority black census tracts, 53% have some solar adoption, 47% have no solar adoption. Now, is this because black people don't have rooftops? No, that is not the case. So I wanted to understand, because this was done by some colleagues at Berkeley, is it a technical potential issue, right? Do we not have enough rooftops in communities of color? But you can see here, if you look at the bars on all the different, the horizontal line on all the different bars, in most neighborhoods, regardless of race, majority race, about 80% of the rooftops have the technical potential for solar. So there are other solutions that we need to address these disparities. So I've always wanted my work to live outside of peer-reviewed journals, and so I've been active in state and federal government policy. In the wake of the Flint crisis, I joined the governor's first Environmental Justice Advisory Council, was able to testify before the House Committee on Energy and Commerce about clean energy equity and access and affordability. And then as we saw the election, about 15 colleagues and I got together to put together policy solutions and options for an equitable energy transition. At that time, I had no idea that I would have the opportunity to join the Biden administration. Got a call in January about joining. Was trying to get tenure at Michigan. I was like, can I do this? I said, hey, I'll start the process. Process is super long for anybody that served in an administration. So I was able to, sorry, Jennifer, extend one semester and join the administration about 6 months in June of 21. I had 3 roles there, one as a senior advisor on energy justice, then taking over as the deputy director for energy justice, and then ending my time in the state and community programs office. So the president set us on an aggressive climate strategy. In 2022, 60% of our energy generation is from fossil fuels, about 18% from nuclear, 22% from renewables. But our goal is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So we got work to do, right? Luckily, Congress has worked together to actually put us on a path to get to our 2030 goal and hopefully our 2050 goal. Now, what you can see, the black line shows kind of where we've been before any of major legislation that we've just had. And I put that arrow here to show you where we should be by 2030. Now, if you look at the green bar, this is the trajectory we're on right now based on our current policy. So we're going to need more national, more state, more local policy to get us to our 2030 goal and then eventually to our 2050 goal. So as this is happening, we have a grand challenge, right? As we are remaking our energy system, we have to think about how this new system is going to be more equitable and just. And the president gave us another kind of opportunity to do that. How many people have heard of the Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad executive order? Okay, a few people, all right. Well, I'm here to tell you a little bit about it. So on his 7th day in office, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008. We call it the Climate EO. And it recognizes that we have this narrow moment when we talk about urgency, right? To pursue action both here in the US, but also in our international policy, to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change, and to use this to seize the opportunity that tackling climate change presents. So our domestic action must go hand in hand with our international leadership. 2 parts in this executive order. I'll focus on the second part. The first part addresses our foreign policy and national security, but the second part talks about the government-wide approach to the crisis. So a couple quotes in here, but I want you to kind of focus on that third bar where it comes to what does a government-wide approach look like? Basically reducing climate pollution in every sector of our economy. So when we talk about decarbonizing our economy, increasing resilience, protecting public health, conserving lands, waters, biodiversity, delivering environmental justice, and spurring well-paying jobs and economic growth. So again, a government-wide approach, different parts of the federal government addressing each of those issues, several agencies addressing multiple issues, getting agencies to talk together to address this crisis. But one part that I want to talk about that really set us on a different path at the Department of Energy and across the government is the Justice 40 initiative. This was another key component of that executive order that really solidified our focus on environmental justice. It says that 40% of the overall benefits of any federal investment in these 8 areas should go to disadvantaged communities, right? So communities like Warren County that I talked about, communities that are suffering from losing coal plants or coal mining, communities that just have been left behind are now at the front of the line for our major investments in the environment. And we had to identify what does it even mean to be a disadvantaged community and where are they located. And so the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool was published that allows us to identify areas of this country that have climate change vulnerabilities, energy burdens, health disparities, housing affordability issues, long-lasting legacies of pollution, transportation issues, wastewater and water issues, and workforce or economic development issues. And so about 28% of the population in the US lives in a disadvantaged community, and about 37% of all US Census tracts. And so this tool allows the government, allows people outside of the government who are applying for funding to identify those communities where we want benefits to flow. Also, this image allows you to see and visualize just how many hands are on deck for this effort. So about 24 agencies, including the Department of Energy, are covered by the Justice 40 initiative. We have the first ever White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, environmental justice leaders from across the country advising the White House on environmental justice. And then at the Department of Energy, again, we brought in everybody. And I was looking for Yasmin, wave your hand. So one of my former colleagues at the Department of Energy just happens to be here in Madison today, who was one of the first employees when we created the Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis to really evangelize energy justice across the Department of Energy. And that's some of the work she's doing here today. And so the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, former governor of Michigan, really wanted to make it clear that justice would be our North Star in the department. And that meant bringing in people like Yasmeen and Shalonda Baker and I to really be her advisors on energy justice. And I'll say, like, she really takes this seriously, and it was amazing to work for her. Now, if anybody's worked in the federal government, no offense, bureaucrats need policy, right? They need policy priorities. They needed to be written out and fully communicated. And so we realized, to get people to see this seriously, we had to say, how does Justice 40 connect to the work that you're doing every day? How does Justice 40 connect to your solar technology office or your wind power technology office or fusion or fission? How does Justice 40 connect? And so we came up with 8 policy priorities. The first one, we want energy to be affordable. We cannot make this clean energy transition and it becomes too expensive for people. So we had to talk about reducing energy burden, reducing environmental burdens. The chart I showed about disparities in adoption, eradicating those disparities, giving access to low-cost capital, creating jobs and opportunities for minority businesses and disadvantaged businesses, clean energy job training, and then focusing on resilience and democracy. We really wanted this new energy system to allow for communities to be resilient and for people to be able to participate in it in new ways. So when we created this, we were just operating with the department's, and not like this is a little bit of money, but the $40 to $50 billion budget that the department had, right? So we're like, okay, well, how do we put this into our existing programs? And we recognized that we had this opportunity, this growing dependence on energy and this push for electrification and decarbonization, this increased risk on our infrastructure, disruptions from climate change. We kept seeing these persistent harms in communities. People were getting vocal, people were eager, and people were getting engaged. And then we got more money. Can somebody say more money? More money? More money. More money, more problems. But we got more money, which made this even more exciting, but also that sense of urgency. Because as you know, when Congress gives federal agencies more money, people are like, how do we get it out the door so Congress doesn't get upset with us? And so this idea of urgency came about again. So I just want to briefly kind of show you the type of money that we're talking about. So again, the department gets about $40 to $50 billion every year. The bipartisan infrastructure law passed in November, which gave the department an additional $62 billion, so more than our annual budget. Then the CHIPS and Science Act passed and gave us another $67 billion. And then the Inflation Reduction Act passed that has about $408 billion in climate and clean energy programs kind of split across the federal government. So again, more money, more problems, but an amazing opportunity to do something really great. So now we had this opportunity where we've created these policy priorities. We have the president's executive orders. We have internal buy-in because we spent a year or so really working with folks to get them excited about equity and justice. But we needed to connect with communities. We needed to let people know that things had changed at the department and that we also had an opportunity for them to participate. So I like to talk about this big check. I've always wanted to give out a big check, and I finally got an opportunity to do that last year. It is definitely the highlight of my time at Department of Energy. But we visited, homes of, hundreds of folks across this country to learn about their connection with energy. And so I titled this slide, Energy to the People, and I also talk about our Energy Justice to the People Roadshow. So we can't do this alone. The federal government cannot do this alone. We have to incentivize states to follow our vision. We also have to support them. And so we supported states, tribes, and local governments with the Weatherization Assistance Program to ensure that low-income families can make their homes more efficient, new programs and home energy rebates. We're gonna talk about heat pumps throughout the country, Energy efficiency conservation block grants, so local governments can do more things on energy efficiency, revolving loan programs, and then making sure we had a workforce, right, with technical assistance on building codes and training for energy contractors. For the first time, we had hard money for schools and nonprofits. Again, the Department of Energy, was really or is really a research and development entity. But now we're doing deployment. We're supporting schools and nonprofit buildings or nonprofit-owned buildings to be more energy efficient and add clean energy. And then again, we have to focus on communities that are having impacts from the transition. And so that same Executive Order 14008 created the Interagency Working Group on coal and power plant communities. So you see that stat there. Starting in 1985, we had 175,000 jobs in coal mining, down to 40,000 in 2020. And so communities are hurting in that recognition that they have to also be a part of this transition. So I'm coming up on my final slides here, but again, to talk about the types of opportunities we were creating or are creating for communities. The Communities LEAP program, looking at disadvantaged communities, knowing that we need to find community-led solutions. And so funding technical assistance for communities across the country to work with the Department of Energy in preparation for the grant opportunities that exist, right? So a lot of times we put grant funding out and expect communities to apply, but they're not starting at the same level of what the grant is requiring. And so how do we do the pre-work to make sure communities are ready to receive funding? And then we wanted to get on the road. We really wanted to both be out there to hear from communities, but then also take our colleagues from DC out into communities. And countless people have come and said, oh my gosh, going on the Energy Justice to the People Roadshow really changed my thoughts about what's happening and about my work. And community benefits plans. A few people have asked me about those. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed my time cue. How do we begin to make Justice 40 real? How do we support communities? If they aren't the ones applying for the funding, but those of us who get funding, how do we ensure benefits flow to those communities? And so focusing on community and labor agreements, focusing on investing in the workforce, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility efforts, and then how does your grant actually support the Justice 40 initiative? And so this is 20% of all DOE applications now that are funded by the infrastructure law or the IRA. How many people have had to write a community benefits plan? Okay, all right, I got a few people. But what really excites me, and when people ask me, like, you're not there anymore now, what are you excited about? I'm excited because Justice 40 lives outside of the executive order. It is just that. It is an initiative in an executive order. And so when a new president is in office, it could go away. It could go away. But what excites me is that it's out there now. I mean, people are talking about Justice 40. People are forming their own ideas about how they make it real, whether it's Albuquerque passing the first ever local ordinance on Justice 40. So we have a city that actually has its own Justice 40 effort. States are doing similar things. Michigan, they don't call it Justice 40, but it's very similar. And it's happening all across the country. The Justice 40 Accelerator launched to help communities be ready for all the federal funding that's coming out. And so they've helped some 150 different organizations get, I think when this stat came out, $43 million in funding. So I'll wrap up here with kind of where I am now. The opportunity to talk about what we did in this administration, to come back to the University of Michigan with its storied history in protecting the environment and focusing on environmental justice. And even in Michigan, there's a Justice 40 committee and task force in Southeast Michigan. So my new role as the director of the Sustainability Clinic, which is a technical assistance and capacity building hub in the city of Detroit to work with the local government and community-based organizations funded by the Kresge Foundation, and now I'm heavy in fundraising mode, which I didn't want to jump right back into that, but here we go. But again, this opportunity, the city passed a climate action ordinance and created a climate action agenda, which you can see some of the areas that they're focused on there, clean energy being number one. Really allows an opportunity for our students, our faculty, to support real life implementation of Justice 40 and climate action. And so I'm excited to begin to lead that work in earnest, but excited to continue to share the opportunities that exist for communities because, again, there's an urgency, but we have to be intentional about everything we do. And I'll leave you with a quote from George Washington Carver, who's my kind of American hero and who I've kind of modeled myself after as a professor. But he says, when we can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, we will command the attention of the world. And I think we have this major opportunity in the US, in our cities, in our states, to really do things that the rest of the world could learn from. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to however much time I have on Q&A.
So thank you, Dr. Reames. So we'd like to invite questions from the audience. If you have a question, there is a mic on the side over here, and you can ask your question for Tony.
And we have time for like one or two questions.
Okay. We got one right here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
What can individuals do to help meet the 2030 goal and energy accessibility to disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, so the question is, what can individuals do to meet the 2030 goals and expand accessibility to disadvantaged communities? That's always a great question. Because I think we often feel very overwhelmed by this issue. I think we've gone beyond the individual actions like recycling and using our reusable bags. And unfortunately, I don't have a reusable cup here for my coffee. But those actions are all great in the grand scheme of our sustainability efforts. The individual action that I have become most interested in is this idea of energy democracy, right? How many people have ever been to a public service or public utility commission meeting? Now, I used to ask that question probably 5 or 6 years ago, and there were no hands. So I'm glad to see some now. But that is like one easy way. So the Public Service Commission in your state sets your rates. It sets what type of energy is generated in and for your state, and a host of other things that are related to our energy consumption and our energy use. Getting active in that is one way. One, you can support low-income customers who usually don't have a lot of advocates, but you can also let the commission know when they're regulating the utility company what you as an energy user, as an energy consumer, demand. So there's a lot of legalese in the public dockets and stuff, but you can show up to those meetings and do public comment and express your concerns. And so I've been pushing energy democracy, particularly in states that have elected commissions, getting engaged in that election. If it's an appointed, making sure you elect the right governor and legislator to appoint the type of commissioners you want. So energy democracy would be the individual action that I would push for now. Anything else?
Do we have one more question?
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
You talked about that you're not only working locally and like nationally, but you're also working globally. Could you tell us like a brief snippet?
Yeah, so that's newer for me. So our International Affairs Office kind of ran most of our global efforts at the department. But because energy justice is a global concept, it started thinking about technology differences between developed and developing nations and what is the role for developed nations to support developing nations in their energy transition. But a lot of countries across the globe are interested in this idea of energy poverty, right? Because we're all transitioning. A lot of people are importing energy, and so it becomes really expensive. And so just this year, I've been to Tokyo, Japan, to talk about energy poverty, and I just got in Sunday from the Netherlands and France, talking about energy poverty and energy justice. And so those opportunities, even as at the larger United Nations, we're talking about energy security. Nation to nation, we're having discussions about kind of the individual, the household level energy poverty issues. All right, well, oh, do we have time? Yeah.
No, awesome. Thank you so much, Tony. It is so nice to see you again. Please welcome.
Thank you, everybody.